Chapter 5. Charlie Dorr came out of the inner office, marked private, and put his hand out. He said,
"Good luck, George. The doc's ready to talk to you now."
He shook Charlie's hand and said, "You might as well run along. I'll see you Monday, first visiting day."
"I'll wait here," Charlie said. "I took the day off work anyway, remember. Besides, maybe you won't have to go."
He dropped Charlie's hand and stared into Charlie's face. He said slowly, "What do you mean, Charlie? Maybe I won't have to go."
Charlie looked puzzled. Maybe he'll tell you you're all right, or just suggest regular visits to see him until you're straightened out. Or," Charlie finished weakly, "or something."
Unbelievingly, he stared at Charlie. He wanted to ask, "Am I crazy, or are you?" But that sounded crazy under the circumstances. But he had to be sure that Charlie just hadn't let something slip from his mind. Maybe he'd fallen into the role he was supposed to be playing when he talked to the doctor just now. He asked, "Charlie, don't you remember that?" And even the rest of that question seemed insane for him to be asking, with Charlie staring blankly at him. The answer was in Charlie's face. It didn't have to be brought to Charlie's lips. Charlie said again,
"I'll wait, of course. Good luck, George."
He looked into Charlie's eyes and nodded, then turned and went through the door marked private. He closed it behind him, meanwhile studying the man who had been sitting behind the desk and who had risen as he entered. A big man, broad-shouldered, iron-gray hair. "Dr. Irving?" "Yes, Mr. Vine. Will you be seated, please?" He slid into the comfortable padded armchair across the desk from the doctor. "Mr. Vine," said the doctor, "a first interview of this sort is always a bit difficult. For the patient, I mean. Until you know me better, it will be difficult for you to overcome a certain reticence in discussing yourself. Would you prefer to talk, to tell things your own way, or would you rather I asked questions?" He thought that over. He'd had a story ready, but those few words with Charlie in the waiting room had changed everything. He said, "Perhaps you'd better ask questions." "Very well." There was a pencil in Dr. Irving's hand and paper on the desk before him. "Where and when were you born?" He took a deep breath. "To the best of my knowledge, in Corsica on August 15th, 1769. I don't actually remember being born, of course. I do remember things from my boyhood on Corsica, though. We stayed there until I was 10, and after that I was sent to school at Brienne." Instead of writing, the doctor was tapping the paper lightly with the tip of the pencil. He asked, "What month and year is this?" "August, 1947. "Yes, I know that should make me 170-some years old. You want to know how I account for that. I don't, nor do I account for the fact that Napoleon Bonaparte died in 1821. He leaned back in the chair and crossed his arms, staring up at the ceiling. "I don't attempt to account for the paradoxes or the discrepancies. I recognize them as such. But according to my own memory, and aside from logic, pro or con, I was Napoleon for 27 years. I won't recount what happened during that time. It's all down in the history books. But in 1796, after the Battle of Lodi, while I was in charge of the armies in Italy, I went to sleep. As far as I knew, just as anyone goes to sleep anywhere, anytime, but I woke up, with no sense whatever of duration, by the way, in a hospital in town here, and I was informed that my name was George Vine, that the year was 1944, and that I was 27 years old. The 27 years old part checked, and that was all. Absolutely all. I have no recollections of any parts of George Vine's life prior to my waking up in the hospital after the accident. I know quite a bit about his early life now, but only because I've been told. I know when and where he was born, where he went to school, and when he started work at the Blade. I know when he enlisted in the army and when he was discharged, late in 1943, because he developed a trick knee after a leg injury. Not in combat, incidentally, and there wasn't any psychoneurotic on his discharge. The doctor quit doodling with the pencil. He asked, "You felt this way for 3 years and kept it a secret?" Yes, I had time to think things over after the accident, and yes, I decided then to accept what they told me about my identity. They'd have me locked up, of course. Incidentally, I've tried to figure out an answer. I've studied Dunne's theory of time, even Charles Fort. He grinned suddenly. Ever read about Casper Hauser? Dr. Irving nodded. Maybe he was playing smart the way I did, and I wonder how many other amnesiacs pretend they didn't know what happened prior to a certain date, rather than admit they had memories at obvious variance with the facts. Dr. Irving said slowly, "Your cousin informs me that you were a bit, hepped was his word, on the subject of Napoleon before your accident. How do you account for that?" I've told you I don't account for any of it, but I can verify that fact, aside from what Charlie Dorr says about it. Apparently I, the George Vine I, if I was ever George Vine, was quite interested in Napoleon, had read about him, made a hero of him, and had talked about him quite a bit. Enough so that the fellows he worked with at the Blade had nicknamed him Nappy. I notice you distinguish between yourself and George Vine. Are you or are you not he? I have been for 3 years. Before that, I have no recollection of being George Vine. I don't think I was. I think, as nearly as I think anything, that I, 3 years ago, woke up in George Vine's body. Having done what for 170-some years? I haven't the faintest idea. Incidentally, I don't doubt that this is George Vine's body, and with it I inherited his knowledge, except his personal memories. For example, I knew how to handle his job at the newspaper, although I didn't remember any of the people I worked with there. I have his knowledge of English, for instance, and his ability to write. I knew how to operate a typewriter. My handwriting is the same as his. If you think that you are not Vine, how do you account for that? He leaned forward. I think part of me is George Vine, and part of me isn't. I think some transference has happened, which is outside the run of ordinary human experience. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's supernatural, nor that I'm insane, does it? Dr. Irving didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "You kept this secret for 3 years, for understandable reasons. Now, presumably for other reasons, you decide to tell. What are the other reasons? What has happened to change your attitude?" It was the question that had been bothering him. He said slowly, "Because I don't believe in coincidence. Because something in the situation itself has changed. Because I'm willing to risk imprisonment as a paranoiac to find out the truth." What in this situation has changed? Yesterday it was suggested by my employer that I feign insanity for a practical reason, and the very kind of insanity which I have, if any. Surely you will admit the possibility that I'm insane, but I can only operate on the theory that I'm not. You know that you're Dr. Willard E. Irving. You can only operate on that theory. But how do you know you are? Maybe you're insane, but you can only act as though you're not. You think your employer is part of a plot against you. You think there is a conspiracy to get you into a sanitarium. I don't know. Here's what has happened since yesterday noon. He took a deep breath. Then he plunged. He told Dr. Irving the whole story of his interview with Candler, what Candler had said about Dr. Randolph, about his talk with Charlie Dorr last night, and about Charlie's bewildering about-face in the waiting room. When he was through, he said, "That's all." He looked at Dr. Irving's expressionless face with more curiosity than concern, trying to read it. He added, quite casually, "You don't believe me, of course. You'd think I'm insane." He met Irving's eye squarely. He said, "You have no choice, unless you would choose to believe I'm telling you an elaborate set of lies to convince you I'm insane. I mean, as a scientist and as a psychiatrist, you cannot even admit the possibility that the things I know are objectively true. Am I not right?" "I fear that you are. So go ahead and sign your commitment. I'm going to follow this thing through, even to the detail of having Dr. Ellsworth Joyce Randolph sign the second one." "You make no objection?"
"Would it do any good if I did?"
"On one point, yes, Mr. Vine. If a patient has a prejudice against, or a delusion concerning, one psychiatrist, it is best not to have him under that particular psychiatrist's care. If you think Dr. Randolph is concerned in a plot against you, I would suggest that another one be named."
He said softly, "Even if I choose Randolph?"
Dr. Irving waved a deprecating hand. "Of course, if both you and Mr. Dorr prefer—"
"We prefer."
The iron-gray head nodded gravely. "Of course, you understand one thing. If Dr. Randolph and I decide you should go to the sanitarium, it will not be for custodial care. It will be for your recovery through treatment."
He nodded.
Dr. Irving stood. "You'll pardon me a moment. I'll phone Dr. Randolph." He watched Dr. Irving go through a door to an inner room. He thought, "There's a phone on his desk right there, but he doesn't want me to overhear the conversation." He sat there very quietly until Irving came back and said, "Dr. Randolph is free, and I phoned for a cab to take us there. You'll pardon me again. I'd like to speak to your cousin, Mr. Dorr." He sat there and didn't watch the doctor leave in the opposite direction for the waiting room. He could have gone to the door and tried to catch words in the low-voiced conversation, but he didn't. He just sat there until he heard the waiting room door open behind him, and Charlie's voice said, "Come on, George. The cab will be waiting downstairs by now." They went down in the elevator, and the cab was there. Dr. Irving gave the address. In the cab, about halfway there, he said, "It's a beautiful day." And Charlie cleared his throat and said, "Yeah, it is." The rest of the way, he didn't try it again, and nobody said anything.